Hi, thank you for joining us here today in St. Albert. We're gathered today on Treaty 6 territory, and I acknowledge the Métis people who share a deep connection to this land. I would like to share some new data that shows the UCP has severely underestimated the cost of a provincial police force, how much it could cost Albertans, and more specifically, how much it could cost the people of St. Albert. In 2021, the UCP hired a consultant to analyze the implications of scrapping the RCMP and creating an Alberta provincial police force. The report found that there would be $366 million in transition costs, along with the loss of $170 million in annual funding from the federal government. However, the report made bold claims that it would cost $7 million less per year to operate the Alberta Police Force compared to the cost to operate RCMP. But the projected annual operation cost in these reports are completely hypothetical and based on a report bought and paid for by the UCP. We don't have to rely on hypotheticals or reports bought and paid for by the UCP government desperate to support false claims. There is a real-world example of the true cost of scrapping the RCMP next door in British Columbia. The UCP liked to point to the fact that Surrey was in the process of moving away from the RCMP to create its local police force. But a new mayor and council has recently elected on a platform of stopping the transition of the municipal police force. Surrey City Administration recently released a report showing the true cost of scrapping the RCMP. The report found it would cost Surrey taxpayers 21% more to create their police force for a city once fully implemented. In fact, Surrey City Council has said that they will need to increase residential property taxes by 55% in order to pay for a new police force, and now they've asked the province to stop the transition. So what does this mean for Alberta? And more specifically, what does that mean for St. Albert? A 21% increase to the cost of operating a provincial police force means Albertans will have to pay an extra $157 million per year for that police force, along with the transition costs and the loss of federal funding. At the local level, a 55% increase to taxes would mean an extra $2,784 per year for the average household in St. Albert. Surrey and St. Albert are different cities, but this is the example that Tyler Shandro has held up as the model for Alberta. And so Albertans should take careful note of why Surrey is abandoning this whole idea. But it isn't just Surrey that's opposed to scrapping the RCMP. Red Deer also conducted a study on the municipal police force in 2020. They found that it would cost millions of dollars more per year and decided against developing the Red Deer police force because it would be a waste of taxpayer money. In addition, victim service organizations, rural municipalities of Alberta, and Alberta municipalities are against scrapping the RCMP. The loss of RCMP services in communities like St. Albert will mean the loss of important community services such as victim service units and community-based policing initiatives. It will do nothing to improve safety in our communities and will pile on more costs at a time when Albertans are already struggling to meet their bills. UCP has already downloaded hundreds of millions of dollars onto municipalities that have led to service cuts and increases in property taxes. Here in St. Albert, Mayor Herron estimates that we've already lost approximately 20% in provincial MSI funding under the UCP. If the UCP are allowed to bring in their new local government fiscal framework in 2024, municipalities could see up to a 40% reduction in provincial funding. Albertans are already paying way more for utilities, car insurance, tuition, student debt, and so much more. This means higher taxes for residents in cities like St. Albert to cover the provincial shortfall while also cutting important community services and projects. Knowing all of that, the UCP want to add even more costs onto Albertans for a police force that municipalities have been very clear they are not interested in pursuing. This is another example why Albertans cannot afford the UCP, and they need to scrap this costly plan. If they don't, Alberta's NDP will do so if we form government in 2023. So now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, David Shepherd, MLA for Edmonton City Centre, who'd like to respond to the EMS report that was released today. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Marie. Earlier this morning, the UCP released their crisis they have created in our ambulance and emergency healthcare systems. Now, obviously, there's a lot to review in this report, but I'll share an initial reaction. I'd say, in summary, from what I'm seeing, it's too little, too late. Yet again, the UCP is completely ignoring clear calls from paramedics themselves to get crews off shift on time, to offer all paramedics a permanent full-time contract with benefits, and expansion of harm reduction services to cut down on the huge number of calls related to drug poisonings. When asked about this today, Minister Copping said it's something, I quote, they are looking at. Well, you know, they've been looking at that for more than a year. And the fact that the solutions that are called for by paramedics themselves are not included in this report is a serious failure. It's telling that no one joined the government presser today from the Health Sciences Association of Alberta, who represent paramedics and many other allied health professionals. The minister also didn't have any real answers to the obvious question, and that is how we're going to staff up EMS when thousands of shifts every month are going unfilled in the Edmonton area alone. I'm also very disappointed that we still don't have the review from the incident in Calgary when ambulances did not reach an elderly woman for 30 minutes after a horrific dog attack last June. I'm concerned that the UCP is creeping into de-skilling crews in Alberta's ambulances and privatizing parts of the system. Even after a year of study and months of delay, this report is still packed with language like establish a vision for the future of EMS. I mean, isn't that what this report was supposed to be? It's also very frustrating to see a task force spend a year coming up with a recommendation to form another task force, this time for emergency departments. I think all Albertans are well aware that there's a crisis in our emergency rooms and that this problem is part of what is driving many of the problems for paramedics. Now, to be clear, there are elements of this report that I certainly am supportive of. The package of pilot programs appears to be worthwhile, and I sincerely hope that we will find some solutions that will help improve ambulance policies. But overall, for the time that it's taken to produce this report, it is very, very thin on real action. And it comes in the final months of the UCP government, so Albertans really can't have any confidence that these recommendations will actually be implemented. It's simply too little, too late. Thank you. Marie and I are happy to take any questions.
Thank you. We'll just check for questions in the room first. A reminder that if you're on Zoom, it's the raise hand function, and if you're on the phone, it's *9. We'll go to a caller on the phone.
David, what are your thoughts on, more specifically, the contracting out of inter-facility transfers? How well do you think this will resolve the problem of the paramedic shortage?
So certainly, again, I think anything we can do to address pressure and to relieve more ambulances and get more paramedics free to provide the life-saving services that they are supposed to be there for, I think is a good thing. In this particular case, it's difficult to say. I don't think inter-facility transfers are anywhere near the biggest problem that we have on the road. I don't think that's what's taking up the majority of paramedics' time. That's not what's burning paramedics out. So certainly it is part of a solution, but I'd say it's a very small part. The government's decision to contract this out, well, we know that this government often has a predilection for looking to opportunities to privatize the delivery of services. We have not yet seen that that necessarily yields better results for Albertans. So we'll be watching closely to see how that contracting process plays out.
Do you have a follow-up, Janet?
I do. I wanted to know, you mentioned some of these pilot projects, and of course today they're touting different methods that they're trying right away, you know, such as leaving a patient who's stable in the emergency room to wait on their own without the paramedics staying. How far do you think these kinds of measures will go to combat the dramatic rise we've seen in demand over the last?
So again, I think it's worth considering and pursuing pilot projects or new ideas as long as we are sure that we are providing safety and support for patients. And indeed, leaving patients alone, if they're considered to be stable, of course, we know a person's condition can change, can degrade quite rapidly. And we've seen already that we are under enormous pressures in our emergency departments. We do not have enough staff to keep up. We have an overwhelming demand, and simply we have extraordinarily long wait times. And so I would want to watch that one very closely. Ultimately, what we're seeing, I think, is the government, again, nibbling around the edges. The core problem is the chaos that's been created by this government in our healthcare system. There are attacks on frontline healthcare workers in the midst of a pandemic. There are repeated decisions to act last and act least and push that system to the limits. And indeed, the lack of attention that we've had because this government has been so wrapped up in its own internal drama. So much of what's announced here today, how much of this could have moved quicker? Could have been accomplished faster if they weren't mired in their leadership race and choosing a new premier and fighting amongst themselves. So ultimately, I think we've got a lot of things that we need to address in the emergency rooms and other areas. I'm not seeing significant action from this government, and I'm certainly not seeing them act collaboratively with paramedics or any other frontline healthcare workers, and that's certainly not what I'm hearing from them.
Thank you, Janet. We'll go to our next caller. Your line is open.
Hi, David. It's Duncan Kinney from the Progress Report. I'm just very curious if you could answer a question about how introducing the profit motive to interfacility transfers does anything to get paramedics back on the road when interfacility transfers aren't typically done by ambulances and typically are done by a different class of worker. How does this get paramedics back on the street? How does this get to the core of the problem?
Well, frankly, Duncan, I don't think it does. And I think you're quite right. We've seen this government repeatedly suggest that adding a profit motive to whether it's to surgeries or interfacility transfers or many other things. Indeed, Premier Daniel Smith has gone even further to suggest that there's other things Albertans should be paying privately for out of pocket. Now, that does not in any way in and of itself improve healthcare. So certainly I think we have opportunities where we can be investing in our public system. We can be better supporting the paramedics we have. The 3 calls that they've put out, get them off shift on time, offer every paramedic full-time work with benefits, and take real steps to restore some of the things that have been cut from harm reduction services to address the pressure from drug poisonings. Those are investments in our public system that could help to address this. But I'm not seeing a lot on the table here from the government in terms of the interfacility transfers. I think it's a very small piece of what is a much larger problem.
Do you have a...
And with regards to these non-ambulance transports, like the scale of these seems to be increasing dramatically. We've seen, just on the AHS side, we've seen them go about $150,000 on non-ambulance transport with associated ambulance in the year before last to just under $1 million in last year. The last fiscal year, and they won't give us, what their estimated costs are. They won't tell us who these other contractors that they're bringing in are. Are you worried again that these non-ambulance transport and that this interfacility transfer is creeping privatization into the ambulance system?
So I appreciate the question. I haven't had a chance to look at or review those figures, the documents those come from, so I can't speak to it specifically. But if that is in fact correct, that is certainly, I think, a good reason to be looking for more transparency. We've seen an utter lack of transparency from this government, certainly on many of the contracts that it signs in the medical realm, and certainly where some of this spending is going. I think certainly if we've had that kind of a drastic increase, there should be some real questions asked about where those dollars are going, what it's accomplishing, and if in fact that is relieving other pressures in the system. So certainly it is a concern when we see the kinds of proposals that are coming forward, and certainly what we have heard from members of this government at different times as these discussions have taken place over the last couple of years, that this is a government, again, another area where this government is looking at increasing private profit in the public healthcare system. And frankly, as I said, we don't believe that in and of itself creates any benefit for Albertans. We have opportunities to invest in our public healthcare system, and that is where we should be looking first.
Thank you, Duncan. We'll go to our next caller. Audrey, your line is open.
Hello. You mentioned at the top that the solutions called for paramedics themselves have not been implemented. In that case, which ones these are?
I'm sorry, Audrey. We lost the end of your question there.
Oh, okay. I'll say it again. As you mentioned that some solutions put forward by the paramedics themselves have not been implemented or have not been accepted. Which ones are those solutions?
So there's 3 clear calls. that we have been hearing from paramedics, and I think we first raised in May of last year, that we raised at a press conference, but paramedics have been calling for consistently. That is, first of all, to ensure that every paramedic gets off shift on time. Paramedics are burning out because their shifts keep getting extended, more overtime. That burns them out. They leave the profession. It creates even more of a problem, makes it worse. Secondly, that all paramedics are offered full-time work with benefits. There is a large number of paramedics who are given casual contracts of 89 days. That is a sign of disrespect towards paramedics who are working to save Albertans' lives and protect their health. They should have the opportunity to be treated as full-time employees and have access to benefits. Lastly, taking real steps to repair and restore some of the cuts that have been made to harm reduction supports and services in the province of Alberta, and indeed expand those services. Paramedics have been very clear, and let me tell you, in downtown Edmonton, I've spoken with paramedics and folks who work in that area. They have seen a significant increase in the number of drug poisonings in the community since the UCP went on attack against supervised consumption sites and cut the number of spaces available for that service within my constituency. So those are the three clear calls that we have been amplifying from paramedics, in which, again, this government is choosing not to address. The minister says they're thinking about it. They've had a year to think about it. It's time for them to act.
Thank you. Audrey, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. And I want to know, what do you think of the governmental strategy to increase the number of paramedics in the province? It says that it is in part looking at increasing the number by recruiting in Australia, which apparently has a surplus, and also working on retaining the paramedics who are already in Alberta, and notably with a better work-life balance. What do you think of this strategy?
So I think certainly improving work-life balance is key. That is what paramedics have been saying for years. And frankly, this government has done nothing to improve the work-life balance for paramedics. The three calls that I just repeated again are all directly things that would improve the work-life balance and respect for paramedics. And we see the government again saying, oh, we're still thinking on that. So that is one clear thing. Secondly, certainly many jurisdictions are looking at recruiting from other parts of the world, other jurisdictions, in many different healthcare professions. But the fact is, it is going to be incredibly difficult for us to recruit people to come into Alberta when we are in a state of crisis in our healthcare system under a government that has consistently and repeatedly attacked frontline healthcare workers, that put politics ahead of public health in the midst of a pandemic, and has now created even further chaos under the new premier, firing the board of AHS, firing the chief medical officer of health, having both deputy chief medical officers of health quit. So what we really need is a government that's actually going to create stability within our healthcare system, that is actually going to work respectfully and collaboratively with frontline healthcare workers, where frontline healthcare workers, including paramedics, feel the government has their back. It was quite clear by the fact today that there was not a single representative from the Health Sciences Association of Alberta that represents paramedics and many other allied health professionals. They had nobody from the field there standing behind this report. That says volumes about the state of this government's relationship. So frankly, they can try to recruit. I think they're going to have an incredibly difficult time in the circumstances, but in a few months we'll have the opportunity to elect an Alberta NDP government that will create that stability, work collaboratively with workers, and engage in that kind of mass recruitment like our province has never seen.
Thank you. We'll do one more pass for calls. Just a reminder, if you're on Zoom, it's the raise hand function. If you're on the phone, it's *9. Seeing none, that concludes our press conference for today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching, and to learn more, check out albertasfuture.ca.